Westcott.
And I'm Sarah Cox. Welcome to the Power of Great Questions. And with us today we have guest Gunter Swoboda. Welcome, Gunter.
Thank you.
Gunter is a psychologist and an author of one book that he's writing, one book that he's already written that's highly successful, called The Mountains of the Sea. The second book that he's writing is Making Good Men Great.
I love the title.
Thank you.
Very good. What caused you to pick that as a topic to write about, Gunter?
Well, firstly, because one of the things that I noticed in the media was that, generally speaking, the media portrays men in a fairly negative framework. So my first reaction was, well, that's not really that good. I mean, if we're trying to encourage people to change, if we keep telling them how bad we are, that's not really going to be a good motivator. So I thought, okay, well, let's make men think about being good. And after a while I thought, no, hang on a minute, let's take it up a notch and let's make them great. So that's how that came about.
Great. It's a good word, great.
That is great.
Sorry, that's an in-joke.
That's all right.
No. We were having a discussion yesterday whether it should be the power of great questions or should be the
Or
power
quality
of quality
questions.
questions. And
No, I like the word great.
Yeah, it's a catchy phrase.
Absolutely.
thank you. Sorry.
Yeah.
Outvoted. Her mother and Sarah and her mother wanted the other word. Finally, I got another guy.
Yeah, well, she actually changed her mind.
Did
She
she?
said great is more catchy for a title.
Sure.
So we
Because
can
I've got the website, I've done everything. I bought the great question. What is the power of great
Yeah,
questions?
well,
And then she wants to change the name of the book, and I'm
Yeah.
going like, you're kidding me?
Well, the other thing is it's powerful questions and quality questions and great questions. So, and so now, Gunter, with your
Obviously.
we can edit it. In your work, are you in agreement with asking powerful questions that it brings about building relationships and reflective thinking and opens dialogue for expansive thinking?
Yeah, I think that's crucial. One of the problems that I constantly run across is that people are being told either what to do, how to do it, but rather than doing that, why don't we give people an opportunity to find their own way of putting that together? And I think that's a lot more productive if we think about opening up a way of thinking that brings that person's own education, experience, socialisation, personality into the picture, rather than constructing something that's based on me and not on them.
And Gunter, in your TED talk I listened to recently, which was brilliant, by the way.
Thank you.
Really enjoyed it. You were talking about the four really important things you think for these modern men now, and not coming home with their armour and in their ties, because we live in such a technical world and we've come away from the primal sense of being a man. Is the first one, if I remember rightly, was inclusivity.
Yep.
And then it was democracy.
Yep.
The next one was
Being distributive.
Distributive.
Yeah.
And
That's right.
and the last one,
Cooperative.
Cooperative.
Yeah.
And now so I'd like for you, if you could tell us and expand on each of those.
Okay, so the original thing that I came across when I started really asking the question about what's traditional masculinity about, it stood out for me that it was about being territorial, hierarchical, acquisitional and competitive. And when you put those four together, what essentially happens is that it allows people to be exploitive, because it's more self-centered rather than relationship-based. So when I started expanding on the whole idea about, okay, what is it that we would need to do to shift, I recognised that each of those four had a reflective part in it, which was that, rather than being, so firmly hinged on my little bit of turf, why don't we make things much more inclusive? And I know that from my personal life, and I know that from the lives of my clients, is when we start to include things rather than exclude, there's a process that happens that triggers growth. Now, when I talk about democracy, I'm not just essentially talking in a political context. I'm talking about a fundamental sense of equality with a respect for difference. Because what's currently going on is that we're all good as long as we're all the same. And that happens within families, it happens within communities, it happens within, a cultural context. And we currently have got, cultural and political issues which are so divisive that people are struggling to find a meeting point. And so for me, that was crucial. So it needs to really embrace the whole idea of respecting differences and working with those. And the other part of it is about being distributive. Now, that's not just in terms of goods or property or assets or material things, but it's actually about allowing myself to share what I feel. And traditional masculinity tends not to allow men to do that effectively. It forces us to wear either a mask or a full body armour, and we don't see what's really behind that a lot of times. So we often, as men operating in that model, are scared to show that because we're not taught that it's okay to be vulnerable. But you can't have an intimate relationship without being vulnerable. And so not only are we then not intimate in our relationships, we're not allowing ourselves to really experience being authentic. And so the final step for me was that whenever human beings have made huge, significant, and sometimes even minuscule progress, it's been through cooperation. It's not been through competition. And I know a lot of people talk about, politics and business and life in general is rooted in a sense of being competitive. I don't agree. I'm a highly competitive person, but not with others. I compete with myself. I'd much rather work together with someone in a cooperative or collaborative basis than trying to figure out how I can beat them. To me, that doesn't make any sense. And unfortunately, I see that in the education system. I see how it works in business, and I also see it in personal relationships. Men are struggling to allow themselves to be vulnerable, which makes them competitive with their partner rather than cooperative or collaborative. So rather than having the genders converge, which we were hoping was going to happen, we're still diverging.
And so that comes back to, if you look at leadership as a whole, if you use those 4 particular things in leadership, the world would be a much more unified place to be living in, and
less combative.
And corporations.
Yeah.
Corporations.
Well, I prefer that.
Maybe we could call them that, and they might become cooperative.
Right.
Yeah, and coming back to questions, how do you go about asking questions if that's the way of opening dialogue and reflective thinking and building relationships?
I think the key questions that I use are about connecting what may appear to be not connected. So, for example, I might start off working with somebody and helping them to explore what they feel. So the questions are around, what are you feeling? How did that emerge? But it's also really important to then explore, well, how does the way that you think influence the way that you feel, and how does that then generate the sorts of actions that you do? And is that consistent with your overall sense of beliefs and values and ethics? And we don't generally tend to reflect a lot on that stuff. Culturally we've gone right into doing rather than being, and being allows that space to reflect. So generally speaking, a lot of times we're used to being reactive. Something happens and boom, we've got a solution. And men in particular are programmed almost to go from, here's the problem, this is the solution. But we don't actually necessarily reflect whether there's alternatives there or whether we could do this in a completely different way. When I was lecturing at university, one of the things I used to say to my students, don't look to me for answers. I'm here to give you better questions. Very much. And some of them would sort of go, ugh. Whereas others, and I used to watch it, they'd prick up their ears and they'd really engage.
Well, that's about mental experimentation as well, because if you think about Einstein, he had that fantastic quote where if I had 1 hour and my life depended on it, I would spend 55 minutes working out what are the most important questions and 5 minutes coming up with the answer to the problem.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, that's great.
Absolutely. One of the things, Gunter, I wanted to ask you about is obviously you've, I'm very impressed, and Sarah tells me all the good things about you, but the TED talk you've done was spectacular. You've got the 2 books, or 1.5 books on the way at the moment.
Yeah.
When you look back over your past, though, what are the things that have kind of shaped what you've become today? What are the experiences you've had in your past that have really made you the person and driven you on this path that you're on today?
Probably change. From fairly early on, my family was into moving. Now, there's a negative part to that, but really, when I think about it, it's allowed me to be adaptable.
Right.
And one of the things I talk about that makes us resilient is being emotionally and behaviourally flexible. So this ability to be flexible leads into being able to adapt. The other thing was I grew up in a context where I never doubted that I was loved. So
Great.
that to me really fits, because what it does is it connects how I think, how I feel and what I do, and it becomes the sort of guiding post. I mean, that's not to say that I don't doubt myself at times, but it prompts me to ask more productive questions, stuff that goes more deeply into the essence of it. I studied philosophy, together with psychology, and people often say to me, why did you do that? And I talk about, well, psychology is a topic, it's a body of knowledge. What philosophy gave me was the ability to think about how I think about the body of knowledge. And so it enables me to take information, contextualize it into what I believe is their knowledge, and then take it into that realm of wisdom, where I know how to apply that knowledge for the best possible outcome long term.
You've raised something really valuable there. I'm sorry to cut across, but I love that concept of thinking about your thinking.
Yeah.
Thinking about your thinking is a really important thing.
Yes.
But I certainly a lot of the work that I'm doing, I'm challenged with that all the time. Why are we thinking that way? And certainly in the workshops I run, we get people to sort of evaluate why they've made certain choices in their life and so on. One of the other issues we often talk about is the zero-sum game versus the abundance game, and you were talking before about competitive nature between men and women. Okay, and in a lot of ways that's kind of what we refer to as a zero-sum game. In other words, someone has to lose for someone else to win. Whereas I'm a great believer in the world of abundance, and that is there's just everything in the world that you possibly want is out there in great abundance. Yeah. How do you change people's thinking from a zero-sum way of thinking, a scarcity way of thinking, to an abundance way of thinking?
For me,